Hello and welcome to the De Morgan Foundation's online lecture series. It's my pleasure today to welcome our speaker, Kerry Orford, for her talk on Ferens Foundation's Philanthropy, Suffrage and Contradictions. As well as being a museum professional with specialism in the arts and crafts movement, Kerry is a trustee of the De Morgan Foundation, and she's currently the curator at the Ferens Art Gallery with Hull Museums and previously head of curatorial at Lakeland Arts, overseeing the programme at Abbott Hall and Blackwell, the Arts and Crafts House, where I will pause to take an opportunity to tell you that there is currently an exhibition called Sublime Symmetry, drawn from the De Morgan Foundation's collection at Blackwell in Bowness on Windermere. So do go and visit that if that's close to you. And now that I've finished doing some ulterior motive promotion of the De Morgan Foundation's exhibitions and introducing Kerry, I will hand over to her for the talk today. Welcome, Kerry, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for joining me. I'll just share my PowerPoint with you. Moment. There we go. So yes, I'll be talking about the history of the Ferens Art Gallery in Hull. So firstly, I'll offer a little bit of context. The gallery opened in 1927 in November. Previously, there were some small public gallery spaces, which I'll talk about briefly later, but it was the first art gallery completely dedicated in its own building to showing art to the people of Hull. The collection today features work from the 1320s through to the present. Our focus is very much on works that show aspects of identity, so portraiture, the human figure, and also we have a designated maritime art collection. So, unlike many regional collections, we do have work, as I've said, from the 1320s, including this Pietro Lorenzetti, which was acquired in 2015. And that is a very significant acquisition for the Ferens. We were able to acquire it through Thomas Ferens's legacy, which is an endowment that allows us to purchase art, including very ambitious and costly works, such as the Lorenzetti. So we are in a very unique position that we are able to do that as a regional organisation. Some significant works in our collection include this fantastic work by Frans Hals that some of you may have seen in the recent exhibition at the National Gallery. It's a later work by Frans Hals, and I think I am fair in saying that it was one of the stars of the exhibition. It was broadly reported on, and it is considered one of his best later works for this amazing characterful face, but portrayed in a very modest way, which is contrary to often what you think about when you think of Frans Hals' works. Why do we have this in the Ferens collection? It's because not only does the collection focus on maritime art, the human form, and general religious subjects and um, pictures of Victorian life, but it also has a very strong Dutch collection. Because of Hull's position, it has often looked east rather than to the rest of Britain, with really strong trade connections with the Netherlands because of its geographical location. Today, as a port city, 70% of the country's trade comes through the ports at Hull and Grimsby. And this is indicative of how it has been in the past as well, with great wealth coming through this area, which also brought fantastic Dutch works. So our collection consists of works that were gifted to the Ferens from local stately homes, most of which no longer exist because they were demolished before and during the 1950s. But we've been gifted Dutch works with a connection to the area. The Franz House does not have a connection to the area, but it was an ambition in the past to purchase such a fantastic work. Um, we also have a small collection of 18th century works, including this Canaletto, which is seen as a highlight, as this is an early work by him from 1724, so the year that he really started out as a full-time painter. It is one of the few works within a regional setting that has fantastic provenance, and we know it is by Canaletto. And later this year, it will be going on a tour of 4 venues in Japan, arranged by the National Galleries of Scotland. I also mentioned that we have a designated
Terry,
maritime.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Just before you move on to this picture, are you okay just to hide the sort of as an automatic zoom? Yeah, there we go. Then we can see the caption.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
um, We also have the designated maritime art collection that I mentioned. This is of both the local and national significance, but also shows works that are internationally important. Um, the works here, there's one by John Ward, of which we have a number. I think we have 16 within our collection and several within the Maritime Museum's collection as well. John Ward was a artist born in Hull and is considered one of the best maritime artists of his period. And he shows Hull here at arguably its most wealthy, with this fantastic Georgian frontage and all of the ships and early steam paddlers coming through. And then we have works like Alexander Johnston's Press Gang, which add a richer narrative to the maritime story that we're telling through the collection. So that's a brief overview of where we're at with the collection today. I'll now talk about Thomas Robinson Ferens, our founder. So, as I've said, the Ferens opened in 1927. There are notes in the minutes and in newspapers of the past, the minutes from the council, that show an aspiration to have an art gallery in Hull, and this predates Thomas Ferens's life. The earliest reference is 1845. We know that there was an annual exhibition, and a very significant exhibition. People would often show their works at the Royal Academy, and then they would come to Hull the same year. That's an area that needs further research and that I'm looking into. But as we look at several early collected works that are in the Ferens's collection, I'll talk about which ones were shown at the Royal Academy and then came to the Hull annual exhibition. We still have an annual open exhibition, but the focus is on local artists within the region, although it is open to all. So a different tone and scale to the Royal Academy's exhibitions. So it will be interesting to, in the future, be able to delve a little bit deeper into that. So Thomas Ferens was not from Hull. He was from Shildon in County Durham. He was born in 1847 and was one of 7 children born to George Waller Ferens, who was a flour miller, and Anne Jackson. So to note, Robinson was a middle name, not a double-barreled name. So we often refer to him as Thomas Ferens. We have this photograph of him that's in our collection, but I've also found this early watercolor that I'm still determining provenance, but it's believed that it is Thomas Ferens at the age of 21. 21 was a significant year for Ferens because it was when he came to Hull. Prior to this, he studied at a private school at Bishop Auckland until the age of 13, and then he took up a job as a clerk in the Stockton and Darlington Railway Company, where he was for several years before coming to Hull. When he moved to Hull, he um, came for a job, and he was originally hired as one of 6 clerks assisting Mr. James Reckitt, who already through his father had established a very strong company in Hull, focusing on aspects of sanitation, so cleaning products. Um, so Ferens started off in a fairly modest role, but very soon he became incredibly well respected as someone who would talk to everyone at the company and was incredibly diligent within his work and would very much take initiative, complete his work early, and gain a reputation for having a great ability to learn about the broader company. So this gave him the opportunity to climb very quickly within Reckitt's. He ended up not long after starting becoming a works manager, where he oversaw the blue and black lead mills and the laboratory, amongst other departments. And he became very interested in expanding the remit of Reckitt's and what they sold. And we know that he was a very strong advocate in creating Reckitt's Blue, which, as this quote shows, Reckitt's Blue made Ferens gold. Because of his ambition and his ability to seek out new opportunities and create huge growth within the company, he became very affluent and noted within the company. Something to note is that from Ferens's very first job at the age of 13, he believed in giving a tenth of his annual salary to charities. And from the moment he started in Hull, this is something that he continued to do. And by the end of his life, he was giving away far more than a tenth. Something also important to note is Reckitt's Blue and Reckitt's the company took on a other company that was creating blue cleaning products and substances in France in the 1880s, we think, although it needs a little bit more research. And Hull became the lead for creating the colour ultramarine. They created 70% of the world's ultramarine blue pigment at one point. So if you think about this time, they're actually revolutionising the history of art, the ability for artists to create work in ultramarine incredibly cheaply. So it's just an interesting little thing there in terms of the relationship between the creation of pigment, brackets, the company, and Ferens and his collecting ambitions. So Ferens, as I said, was a great philanthropist. He gifted £250,000, which was a huge sum, to create the University of Hull as it is now known. This photograph is from Hull Daily Mail. It shows Thomas Ferens here with the late Queen Mother here and the then Duke of York. And it's at the laying of the foundation stone for the university. When the university was complete, also in 1927, the year that the Ferens opened, he also gifted a further £240,000, and following his death, more money was bequeathed to the university. And like us, they still have an endowment fund which benefits the student population today. So Ferens's work is still considered incredibly significant, and a number of streets and places are named after him around Hull. He also gifted land near his home to form East Park, and also this fantastic boating lake, which sadly no longer exists. But I believe quite a few people are keen on reinstating it. and he built Holderness House, which was his home, where he lived with his wife Esther Ellen, which is in East Hull. Um, and when he passed away, Ellen had already died several years earlier, and he left it to the people of Hull to become a nursing home for women who had come on hard times and needed somewhere to live. And that continues today as a nursing home specifically for women. Um, However, by far the thing that he funded most consistently is the Brunswick Wesleyan Chapel, his local chapel, which was demolished in 1960, but he funded a number of projects, building projects, and also the building of a Sunday school as well. So, back to the Ferens. This is a photograph of what is now the back of the Ferens. You can see here the church that the Ferens is now built on the site of. This church was demolished. It wasn't being used as much as the port. As the dock changed, and mariners didn't use this one as much as other churches around Hull. So it was demolished. It was demolished, and the site was cleared. This here is now Hull's Maritime Museum, and this is a statue of William Wilberforce, another incredibly famous person from Hull. This has since been relocated to the other end of a park adjacent to the Maritime Museum. But it shows that the positioning of the Ferens was incredibly significant because they wanted it to be right in the centre of town, in the heart of everything that was happening, and it is adjacent to the water, rightly or wrongly, for an art gallery. And here is the front of it with a statue of Queen Victoria. This is during the First World War. So it gives you a sense of how central the positioning was within Hull. Here you can see where it's been demolished, and we know that it took a number of years to demolish and remove the burial sites from within the church and relocate them to a cemetery further outside the centre of Hull, which Ferens himself refers in letters to it as it's been delayed due to complications, not going into detail as to why. Um, so, an interesting fact for me, who is currently in the basement of Ferens, where the bodies would have originally been laid to rest. Um, you can see that it is very integral into the town planning, and this still is the layout today. However, these buildings have been replaced by other slightly less grand buildings. And here is the building of the Ferens. We know that it took less than 18 months. The Duke of York came and laid the first stone here as well, and it was done within 18 months. It was actually almost a year to the day that it opened from the Duke of York's visit. And here's a photo not too long after it opened, which shows how close the water is. These were actually buildings not part of the Ferens, but for boat workers who were working on ships within this space. Today, this is a shopping centre that backs on, and also this is the back of it is an extension that was created in 1989 and opened in 1991 to create more gallery space. So, um, thinking about the early collection, we know there were aspirations from 1845 to create a gallery for the people of Hull. Um, there are ample records of many works being collected that were portraits of local politicians and important business people, which now form the base of the collection of Hull's Guildhall. We also know from early records of the Ferens that they were being constantly offered such portraits, and the committee decided no, we are not taking any portraits of anyone significant to Hull. We want to focus on a great art collection that is significant for the people of Hull and show contemporary works. Now, I mentioned the annual exhibition that was held, that, as I said, requires more research. But we know that works were started to be purchased from this exhibition from 1902 onwards. This work by George Cockram is noted as one of four that were the first works in 1904 to be officially considered the foundation of the collection of the people of Hull. Now, we know that Thomas Ferens sat on the committee that decided which works went into the collection, but actually, the first four works, this one, we don't know who supported the purchase. We think it was Ferens, but the other three works were provided by other wealthy industrialists within Hull to start that collection off. So, in terms of a display space, for a while this was listed as the Ferens, but it's completely the wrong size room. The wrong skylights, the wrong historic features. So it is most likely that this is the top floor of the Royal Institution, which was a space on Albion Street in Hull, where we know that the annual exhibition was held. But there's also records that amongst the annual exhibition, Ferens would show his own personal collection. So I'm in the process of trying to identify any of these works alongside the Ferens's collection. So far, I've had no success, but I'll keep going. Um, so the collection started in 1904, the aspiration of several people, but very much pushed by Thomas Ferens. In 1906, he became the Liberal Member of Parliament for East Hull. And he also released an endowment, the start of an endowment, £5,000 to be used to be purchased over spent over several years to purchase works for an art gallery for Hull. This was the first work to be purchased in 1906, selected by committee, but with the support of an art curator from Manchester Art Gallery. Two further works were purchased. This work by Sidney Lee, The Cathedral Doorway, which we have a record that it was purchased for £50. I believe from the records there was another work that was considered too expensive to be purchased. So clearly the committee were looking for lower value but quantity to form this initial collection. Interestingly, one of the first works acquired was by a contemporary woman painter, Georgina Martha d'Aubigné. She wasn't French, her husband was. She is perhaps more recognized today in Canada. She spent a number of years with her husband working there, and the majority of the research on her career comes from galleries in Canada that hold her works. Two of her works, however, were purchased by Queen Victoria, who apparently was a fan of hers. And this is quite an interesting work for its sheer size. It is very large, so nearly 1.5 meters in width, watercolor, and incredibly highly detailed. So, going to the Ferens itself, I've said it was completed in 1927 when it opened to apparently very little fanfare. Ferens himself was in a bad way in London. He'd hurt his leg, possibly needed an operation, so was unable to travel back to Hull. He'd asked his friend, the industrialist, also from Hull, Lord Devine, if he would open it. Apparently, Lord Devine was also very unwell, unspecified as to why at that time, so unable to open it as well. So, Ferens's niece was brought in to open it. The records show that she was asked to come in at 2 o'clock. She was handed a special gold key that was later engraved and given to her, but we don't know where the key is today. It's something I'm hoping to track down. And all of the councillors, their family, and friends were invited, and it opened with very little ceremony. So that's something we're hoping to correct in 2027 when we have our centenary. So interestingly, you can see this is the centre of the Ferens. We call it the centre court. This is a photograph taken, I think, in the early 60s, particularly given the Henry Moore, the Barbara Hepworth, the Eduardo Palozzi, and the Jacob Epstein that you can see here. But it also had, originally built in 1927, a fountain at its centre, which was taken out controversially in the 1960s as it was seen as something that took up too much space as the collection had grown. But today, not very good for ensuring good environmental management and a good level of humidity. There are, however, parts of it within our store that were kept, but the majority was dismantled and taken away. So the collection, as I said, grew very quickly from this initial £5,000. We know in 1927, when the Ferens opened, a number of works from Ferens's own collection were directly transferred as a gift to the Ferens and were um, put on display for the public, which helped increase the number of works that they could see and were given forever to the collection. This is an image of the stores. I'm yet to determine what year it was, but it shows early on the collection was being built up very rapidly with contemporary works. And for those wondering, I thought I'd show why this woman is in such delight, this fantastic work called Gossips, which is very characterful. So, early works that were collected by Ferens himself include this work by Walter Langley and Frederick Leighton. We know that they were purchased in 1907 and 1912, and they are on the list in 1927 that they were gifted. Now, what's quite interesting about these works is the motivation behind them being collected for the people of Hull by Ferens. Now, I imagine these will have been displayed in his own home. There are records showing that they were in his home at certain points, but not which works exactly. But he said, and others who were his family members have said after his death, that he was collecting specifically for a gallery, for a public space. He wasn't collecting for himself, he was collecting with an intent on purchasing significant works that would resonate with the people of Hull. This certainly requires a lot more research into his motivations, but there are many scenes that were purchased that show aspects of everyday life and working class society, which was particularly important to Ferens. I found this fantastic letter that he wrote in 1910 when he was re-elected as a member of parliament for East Hull. And he writes to a Mr. Ormsworth that he is really proud of East Hull and of the East Hull workers particularly. And he's writing to Mr. Ormsworth to thank him for his continued support and help with campaigning. He says that they are the envy of his opponents and also his political friends in other constituencies across the country. His ability to continue throughout his career as he rose to eventually, upon his death, chairman of Reckitt's, shows that he constantly communicated with his workers. He was really empathetic to the people of Hull and wanted improved conditions for his workers and improved life for them as well. So this was also one of the works we know that was purchased by Ferens that was likely in his home from 1910 to 1927, but sometimes on display in that top floor of the Royal Institute on Albion Street. There are some queries, though, as to when these works entered the collection. This fantastic work by Rosa Bonheur, The Lion at Home, purchased by Ferens himself in 1913. It's unknown as to what point this entered the collection. It's not in the list of works from 1927. So it is possible that it came to the Ferens in 1930 after his death, but it requires a lot more research. The Edgar Bundy as well was particularly interesting to me initially, as a note said that it was part of the 1927 opening exhibition, and it was in a list that said that it was acquired by Ferens. However, there is other documentation that says that it was purchased in 1907 under the advice of the newly recruited city curator, who also sat on the panel for acquisitions. So more research is needed around this period of acquiring for the Ferens and of Thomas Ferens himself. It's also interesting to note the number of works by women artists that were collected and the subjects as well. This work by Elizabeth Thompson Butler is a firm favourite within the collection, and the foresight for it to be purchased in 1913 by Ferens. We don't know at what point it was gifted to the Ferens Art Gallery, but it will certainly have been one that he bought for the people of Hull, but sat within his home as well. So, on the theme of women, I've briefly mentioned his niece, of which he had several nieces through his wife, Esther Ellen Field, who became Esther Ellen Ferens. There are notes that say that she was collecting with him and selecting work with him, but we don't know to what extent her involvement was. And that's something that we're looking into currently and hoping to work with the University of Hull and the Wilberforce Institute on a project working towards 2027 that looks at the role of the women in Ferens's life in terms of influencing that collection and the selection of works All we have are notes that say that she shared his enthusiasm, that she was deeply interested in art, and that she helped select, but we don't know to what extent. We don't know if they went to exhibitions together and selected together. We don't know how influential she was. And we also don't know why his niece was selected as a significant person to open the Ferens in its early days. So more research is certainly needed. I also don't know the name of the dog, so that's something I'll be looking into. So, on the theme of new research, there are a few works within Ferens's collection that offer a form of contradiction to his beliefs within his collecting habits. So, this work by James Draper, we know was acquired by Ferens. We know it was part of the 1927 opening exhibition of the Ferens. It was shown at the Royal Academy, and then it came to Hull to be displayed, at which point we know Ferens chose to purchase it from the annual exhibition. Now, Thomas Ferens, within his political career, he was known as not the strongest of public speakers, which probably did hamper his career. But in the small courts of parliament, he would lobby government for the rights of women specifically. He was an ardent supporter of women through his charity work and also through his political work. We know he supported suffrage, he believed in women's right to vote. And it is reflected somewhat in his collection. So, why did he decide to buy this work by Herbert James Draper, who is known for creating works that showed partially nude women, often fetishized, very young? The subject of this work is Ulysses and the Sirens. And you can see Ulysses here tied by his man to the mast of his ship, and that he can hear the sirens, but unlike his men, he's made them cover their ears so they can't hear the siren call. Now, this is a particularly poignant work because of the time that it's made, as women are gathering together, rising in their campaigns, becoming militant as suffragettes in their fight for women's votes. Here we show the danger shown by Draper of women if they gain a voice. Their voice will drag men down to their depths. What is the connection between this and Draper's own thoughts on women's rights? So juxtapose this with work in a private collection made several years, nearly 20 years before, The Sea Maiden, made in 1894. Again, a slightly fetishized view of a sea maiden, or siren, but it's more sympathetic than Hull's work to the plight of the siren. The men become a longing threat, looking longingly, but also in a competitive way, fighting towards the sea maiden. Here, the women are shown as a threat to the men. One early art historian looking at this suggested that because Herbert Draper had got married, his views on women had changed over time through his relationship with his wife, and he now had a more negative view on women. This is speculation, but a quite interesting point of view to have. This work is something that I am currently looking into for a major exhibition that will be on display at the Ferens next year, that looks into representations of sirens in relation to the rise of suffrage and women as campaigners. The final work that I want to look at is this beautiful, intricate work, and the photograph is high res, but it just doesn't do it justice. A very large work by Edward Atkinson Hornel, and it's Lace Maker's Cylon. Now, we know that Thomas Ferens lobbied government in the small courts to end the trafficking of girls and women in the empire, particularly focusing around India, but also Sri Lanka, where this work was created or inspired and then created in Scotland. So Edward Atkinson Hornell went to then Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, in 1907, and he took amazing photographic records of the people that he encountered. Now, he went during a very poignant time within the history of the British Empire. It was during a period where 1 million Tamil people were being trafficked from India to Sri Lanka to work creating tea and coffee to fuel Europe and the British Empire. And Hornell captured this within his work. However, this work shows lace makers, or does it? So these photographs are courtesy of Broughton House at the National Trust Scotland, where in the first lockdown in 2020, they did research into their huge archive of Hornell's photographs. And they found that there was a difference in terms of Hornell's representation of people within Sri Lanka, depending on their ethnic background. And he would sometimes show them, as in these photographs, in lovely, clean, white clothes, doing very wholesome activities. Other times, particularly when showing the Tamil population, he would depict them on dirty floors, doing very hard manual work. He never asked for the permission to take the photographs unless there was a man present. Now, I hinted at, are we seeing lace makers here? So we can see from this photograph down here that we can see a young girl with her equipment laid out, which you can see in the photograph. However, lace makers were traditionally older women, not young girls. And we can see here from this photograph, which also features within the composition aspects of it, these women, they're actually playing the drums. So Hornell was more interested in capturing a beautiful composition that would sell rather than um, creating something that was true to the culture of Sri Lanka. So this feels quite contrary to what Thomas Ferens was doing within his political career. Um, so I'm going to stop sharing, sorry, and come back to me and just round up. So we are now working with the University of Hull, with the Wilberforce Institute, hoping to get funding for a collaborative doctoral position to do further research into the foundations of the Ferens in relation directly to Ferens's family and his political career and aspirations with regards to the collection. There are a number of archives and information across Hull that have not been brought together. We have our own small archive at the Ferens. We have the city's history centre, which has a huge holding of Ferens's personal records and accounts from the late 1800s till just before his death in 1930. And the university, of course, have a archive as well. So we're hoping that we can work collaboratively across the city to really delve into what we think is a very interesting story that shows the motivations of some of his collecting habits in terms of him being a curator in his mind for Hull, but also exploring if he really knew meanings and the context behind many of the works that were being collected by him, or if he was actually just collecting what he thought was aesthetically pleasing for the time. So hopefully in 2027, we will have a new exhibition that focuses on the history of the Ferens and gives that early understanding of how the collection was formed. So I'll conclude there and open up to any questions if there are any.
Wonderful, Kerry. Thank you so much for taking us on that journey through the Ferens, as you sort of said in your title, right through from the foundations and the people responsible for that, all the way up to the wonderful work that you're doing today to find out more about that history and kind of really put different elements of it under the microscope, which is fantastic. As Kerry said, if you've got any questions, please do put those in the chat box and we'll be able to see those, and I can put your questions to Kerry if you do have any. Someone says, thank you very much for an interesting talk. It reminded them of their visit with their husband. So lovely. I'm glad people have been up to the Ferens. I confess that I never have. A question from me, Kerry, to kind of to get things started whilst people have a think. As you mentioned, Ferens ideas about collecting obviously came from his, huge amount of philanthropy and his really sort of generous outlook and understanding that his fortune could make the city a better place. But aside from wanting to collect in order to make an art gallery, which was a very Victorian ideal that he was following, do we know if there was anything in him in particular that made him want to collect art for the gallery, and the painting, to collect modern art? Do we know that he particularly liked certain things or knew certain artists?
We don't, and that is why more research is needed. I think what's interesting to note is that it's been said by his family not long after his death, but also still through the wider family now. They talk about, due to his upbringing and his devout religious beliefs, he didn't feel that with the amount of money that he amassed, he should have such luxuries. So I think he wanted an output as well as a legacy from all of the extreme wealth he was acquiring. Something to note is at his death, he left predominantly to charities the equivalent of £19 million today. So my understanding is that he saw himself as the keeper temporarily of his money, and therefore by forming an art collection, he was able to indulge in something he was probably, I think, clearly passionate about. We can just deduce that by looking at the sheer volume of works that he did collect, of which there were many, and very varied. But it was very much with intent as an output for people in the future. So yeah, a lot more research and a lot more potential to delve into there.
Yeah, well, great that that you're doing that, and that's sort of being recognised at the museum level as well. A question from Margaretta: were there any other collectors in Hull who were collecting on that same level that Ferens was at that time?
No, but Lord Devine, who I mentioned, gave quite a few works to the Ferens throughout his life, and as bequests following his death, and then his wife also gave further works. I've not really touched on that at all because there's currently a PhD student who spent several days going through our archives and is working on research into looking at the relationship between Devine's collection coming to the Ferens, but also London galleries as well, which will hopefully be a publication in the future. So that's something to look out for. Two leading Hull men um, collecting art. And we know they were great friends. So maybe some of that interest in art from Ferens came from his friend Devine. We also know that Ellerman also purchased a large company in Hull, John Ellerman, and also, of course, has a great relationship with art, and his legacy prevails and benefits curatorial teams today. So it kind of all comes back to those friendships, I think, that really need exploring as well within this.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Helen says, thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. She's watching this from Hull, which is her home city. Helen, you'll have to go down later on today and visit the museum again. But yeah, lovely message of thanks there. I know you've sort of selected images of paintings in the collection specifically for this talk today, Carrie, and I know that the collection will be, vast in comparison to what we've seen. But it just struck me with the images that you were showing that they're very vivid, they're very bright colours, particularly going from the Bonheur to the Hornel, they really are quite visually interesting pictures, and I think that can be said of the sort of the Langley and the Leighton that you're showing us before. They seem to be very kind of bright, vivid modern pictures, and I wonder if that kind of impactful picture was perhaps something that Ferens was looking for when he was putting his collection together.
Yeah, I think there's an element within the collection where creating joy is really important. And I think I see it today. We have generations of visitors who have come in throughout their whole life. We have people who come in every week. We have one person who comes in every day to use the cafe and drifts through, seeing if there's anything new. And there still is a very personal relationship between the people of Hull and the Ferences collection in a way I've never experienced anywhere else I've worked. And I think going back to the positioning of the Ferens building at the center of all the action, being replacing a church right by the docks with the hope that sailors will come in as a point in between journeys when they're staying overnight, but also in the hub of all that activity of the main economy of Hull. I think it was created as this place that would uplift the people of Hull, um, particularly during hard times when people were away at sea, which was very much a thing that touched nearly every family in the area. So it's quite poignant that it replaces a church and becomes the cultural hub of hope. So yeah, that's quite an interesting thought, Sarah. Thank you.
No, not at all. It just really did. I'd love the Bonheur
Mm.
painting of those tigers, that especially. They do seem quite accessible, like you've said, and it's just a real vibrancy to the ones that
Yeah.
showed us.
And the Bonner, so a couple of years ago, it was requested to go to the major Bonner retrospective that happened in Paris, but before that in Bordeaux, in her hometown. And I consulted quite a few people because I knew it hadn't left the Ferens since it came to the
Wow.
Ferens. I could find no record of it going on loan. So for it to go for a full year and not be on display was quite a big thing, but we decided it was right for it to go. Got several complaints that people couldn't see it because they were so used to seeing it throughout their lives as a really important, fantastic, very lifelike, and absolutely huge work. Um, it was great that it went to the Musée d'Orsay. It was seen by nearly 100,000 people in a short period. Um, but the great thing about it going was we knew that it couldn't go with its glazing in because it was very old, very brittle, very large sheet of glass. And we had to take it out, which was absolutely nerve-wracking in case it shattered, because that was the fear, it would shatter when it was in transit. We managed to get it out in one piece and then break it down. Um, but because of that, we got to send it to a conservator and have the varnish removed and have it revarnished. And the colours that came out were phenomenal. When it came back, I put it straight on display. Literally, it came off the back of the truck and went on display while we were open to the public, which was quite interesting seeing everyone's reaction. Um, and within 2 days, I had to put a barrier around it, unfortunately, because everyone was stroking the lions because they are so appealing and everyone has this deep connection to them. So there remains a little barrier around it to protect it, but at least now people get to see it without the horrible glare and reflection. They see it as it was made by Bonheur.
Well, that I think is a lovely anecdote to finish on, because I think that just shows what an important collection this is to Hull City, and I think worth the complaints. There's a part of me that always thinks people don't know what they've got till it's gone, and sometimes taking things away and then bringing them back is a great way for, for people to realise that in museums and art galleries. But Kerry, thank you so much again for that talk today. It was a thrilling ride through the history of the Ferens. I really enjoyed it, and I know everybody listening today did as well. And thank you everyone for listening, and see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.